Welcome, everybody. I am Pam Goins, Executive Director of NASCA, joined by Jamie Rogers, our Deputy Director, Kayla Leslie, our Program Coordinator, our entire Richmond, Virginia studios team, and 4 really awesome state panels that are coming up this afternoon. So we're going to get started. Each of these states were wonderful to really do a micro review with us, have an opportunity for our team, Scott's team, to just really take a close look at some innovative practices that had to occur because of the global health pandemic. And so what we want to do is to really expand that conversation today, learn more from them. We're going to bounce back and forth between the Richmond studio and the Lexington studio with facilitation. So without any further ado, let me kick it over to Jamie, who's going to talk with our Colorado team.
Welcome everyone. Well, I also have my lovely The Breakfast Show here, Scott, who's going to serve as our kind of co-host. But I'm going to start with asking my Colorado team to join us. Go ahead and turn on your cameras. And first up, I'm going to introduce Cara Veach. Cara, I'll ask you here in a second to introduce all the amazing team members. It has been a pleasure to watch in this recording and really learn about your Employer of Choice initiative in Colorado. So I'll kind of give a quick overview, but also know your team can do it a lot better than I can. Is that it started with an employee engagement survey. And then you guys did some listening sessions, 45 listening sessions when I was watching through your recordings. Oh my goodness. You guys had a virtual site where you also took feedback. And then based on all this feedback, broke up into 6 work groups. And those work groups, I was looking through your strategic plan, built out a roadmap. So over the next 3 years, you're going to fill out kind of that roadmap based on these 6 goals. So it was really interesting to learn about all of these 6 different goals and what you're going to do. So you guys had a group on compensation. You had one on talent growth and development. On EDI, I always love being in Colorado because they switch around the letters on us, but EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Health, safety, and well-being, recruiting, and work perks. So Cara, I'm going to kick to you first. Kind of this, I went over it really quickly. If you guys haven't watched it yet, go watch their recording. Tell us a little bit about the really quick version of this initiative, but also introduce your team.
Sure, Jamie, I think you hit all the highlights. The vision here was really to become an employer of choice, but understand what employees want. Like I could have gotten these people, the panelists with me in a room, we could have come up with a plan ourselves, but really going out and listening to what employees want in an employer of choice, as well as potential applicants. So with me is Tim Barker. He is our head of the Center of Organizational Effectiveness, which is our statewide training program. I think important to note, in Colorado, we have like a centralized, decentralized model of HR. So our role is to set the rules, policies, and procedures and support the agencies in accomplishing their goals. So each agency also has an HR department that does things like their own hiring, managing performance. Clara Woodmansee is our Director of Consulting Services. No consultants can hire her away, but what she does is she basically serves as a consultant to all the other agencies on our rules, on difficult issues that they're facing. And then John Bartley is our Deputy Director for the Division of Human Resources. So that is our statewide organization. And he has been pivotal in our, what we at Colorado call EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion efforts.
Yeah, I learned so much watching through this session, but let's just kick it off first. You had these 6 groups. One was that, and did that come all from the listening? And then now that you guys have started, you've met with all these groups, would you have stuck with those groups? Are those the same big subjects? If another state is doing this again, is that how you would divide up this project?
Great question. So all of these came from the listening sessions, but I will be candid. Ramona Gamal, the state chief human resource officer, who did the listening sessions, we said regardless, equity, diversity, inclusion is going to be on this roadmap. But it came up in a variety of sessions. It comes up in our, we do a every other year all employee survey, it comes up in that as well. So certainly employees wanted it, but these came from employees. I don't know that we would change it, but we might change the emphasis. So work perks has flexible work arrangements kind of hidden under it. And I think what we always want to do is set stretch goals, but I don't think when we set the strategic plan, we would have said we want 60% of our employees to work remotely. That never would have happened. And that's where we are now. And flexible work, as everybody knows, and every single state is dealing with this right now, is sort of spitting into a different group, still under employer of choice, but we're using a group of deputy directors because we convene all the deputy directors and the HR directors together to kind of help us think through flexible work arrangements and the supports they need going forward.
So overall, let's say a state is just starting those 6 categories, you still feel really confident, but definitely now that telework has massively increased in scale since you first started, that has also kind of spun off and there's more work around that.
Yeah.
So another big theme in watching this, and I heard it echoed throughout everyone, was this idea of collaboration. So I even pulled a quote that you said is, how do we use our state expertise differently? And you had talked about how you use the expertise of your economic development cabinet. You use the expertise of a diversity coordinator. So almost using what other expertise you guys had in the state. And I thought that was a really interesting concept. So I don't know if either John or Cara, whoever speaks to this best, on how you really leaned on other state experts outside of your agency to make this work.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's actually been one of the big success stories, at least from my perspective, is convening groups of state employees, whether it's in a specific functional area or it's because they are experts in a certain field. But I guess in particular in the work that I've been doing with regard to EDI, we found there were pockets of this work going on in different agencies all over the state. Cara spoke to our centralized and decentralized model, and I think what our particular successes and I think a lot of the learning that we've done has been in convening these interested parties from different agencies, and it's kind of happened in different ways. 2 examples would be the EDI cabinet, which Cara has been pulling together, which is EDI officers and interested cabinet members from different agencies. And that's given us a forum from really discussing the sort of the larger issues with regard to leadership and EDI. In a similar vein, our agency has been charged through the executive order, our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Executive Order, to address accessibility and in many different areas. And our agency has convened statewide experts in the areas of physical space, technological space, including websites, and then communication, including language, so that we're hitting accessibility in all of its many different facets. And as we pull more people into that conversation, I think we're even identifying other areas and opportunities to involve other stakeholders. So I think that's been a lot of the success story. There's a lot of eagerness to be part of the larger conversation, and I think that's moving us in the right direction.
John, can I jump in there on that accessibility front? Has that target shifted as a result of the digital environment that people are working in, where we might have thought about sort of accessibility doors and ramps, but now you're thinking about a different type of accessibility?
Yeah, I was actually just in a conversation with a couple of employees yesterday who are thought leaders in this space. And what they told me, this is really, part of my own learning this year has been in the accessibility space. And what they said was, it's really interesting over the last couple of years and actually kind of distressing because technology has been outpacing accessibility. So when you think about online training, or you're thinking about timekeeping systems, or even, our move to the Google environment from Microsoft, the path has not been smooth from an accessibility standpoint, and employees will share with you that they feel like they're one upgrade away from losing their jobs, and that's when it becomes really pretty serious. When that's just talking about our employees, that's not even thinking about public facing, how we're interacting with Coloradans with disabilities and ensuring that that our materials are accessible, or recent immigrants, or people for whom English is a second language. If they've got to dig down 6 different pages to get to a translation that will help them access the information they need, that's not accessible, right? And so we're looking at this question in a new way, and trying to involve the community to help us gauge where we are and how we can be better in serving them.
Yeah, excellent. And you could just tell in watching through how much accessibility EDI really echoed through every single one of the big work groups. You could see an EDI component of that. Well, Clara, the next question is going to come to you. You talked about potentially before this, you're going to have a branding campaign, and now there may not be a branding campaign, but there was something really unique that you talked about as a recruitment tool, is creating an authentic community engagement. And I saw that in your strategic plan is really building authentic relationships, also with an EDI lens, as a way to recruit employees into the state. So talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so excited about kind of, I think COVID has forced us to think in new and different ways, and to really think about how we collaborate and engage differently. And, everybody loves a project that checks multiple boxes for us, and this one just seemed like such an obvious solve. If we can't, spend money right now to do something really elaborate in terms of employment branding, we at the same time know that we have pockets of job seekers. We have groups that engage with job seekers. We have groups that reflect the demographics that we would like to see more of in our population. And usually all it takes is making a connection and finding out two things. And I think this has been a big learning for us. It's not just, do they have a job board where we could post a position, but what services can we offer their clientele? One of the things that we know to be true about employee engagement is that volunteerism, the ability to work differently in the community, is something that's really valued among not just candidate pools, but existing employees. So we're looking at what are the opportunities to go out and work with groups and do things like mock interviews, resume assistance. How can we be of service, while getting in front of their job seekers and sometimes even their employees? It's a secret extra strategy, but anything we can do to get out there and create those two-way dynamic relationships, that is branding. And that's no cost branding, right? But that's really showing who we are as a state. It's telling of our culture. It helps us expand our cultural point of reference in terms of getting out there and understanding what the community's interests, needs, what are their perceived barriers. So that's definitely something that's been really fun and continues to evolve. And I don't know that we know exactly what we're doing, but every conversation I have is that much more fascinating.
Well, in reading that, it also seems like that's something that other states could replicate, really that authentic community engagement and building those relationships. We've done a previous session. There is a network gap in knowing about types of jobs. And so if you're building those engagements, you're overcoming that network gap of, I knew how to apply for a state job, but hey, I did have this interaction with state government. All right, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it also helps soften our image. When people see you as a person because I've had a conversation with you, they start to see the state differently. We become less of, the man and more of, oh yeah, I met someone and we had a great conversation. I mean, it does volumes of work for us.
Well, and I loved how Cara ended. I don't know if you guys have watched the recording, but she said, I want in the future for people to come up to me and say, how do I get a job in state government? I want my neighbor to come to me and say, how do I get a job in state government? And so when you're talking about softening that image, wanting to work in this kind of place. So the next question is going to go to Tim. Another big winner, something we didn't get to dive into a lot in the recording, was the system of LMS. So that throughout this whole process, your team realized there wasn't a one way to get out training. And it seems like you guys built different systems of a learning management system. So talk about what your solution there. That's a big
Yeah,
winner.
it was. I think that the need to build that system came from the initial collaboration that Kara talked about. So when we did a good job of reaching out to our customers and finding out what they needed, what we quickly identified was, one, many of our customers already had systems in place, and the cost of changing systems would have been cost prohibitive. They weren't really interested in doing it. They had a lot going on there. And then we also had another group of agencies that didn't have anything. So the diversity of needs within our customer group could not have been greater. And so I think that collaboration is just been the key to success throughout this. We convened groups. We knew who the general agencies were, and we asked for people in each one of those. We asked for representatives in each one of those agencies, and that made it really easy to determine who had systems. And then who didn't have systems. And then John and some of the groups that he had been working with created this relationship with one of the higher educations within the within the state, and they were able to provide a low cost, easy to access solution that was already being used within the state. It didn't have to be a new system. So I think that the success of this project so what we ended up with was right now 98% of the agencies within the state currently have access to LMS technology, and that remaining 2% is on path, just hasn't implemented yet. So in less than a year, we turned on LMS functionality for a lot of agencies. And through that communication, through the engagement, the work that we did earlier, we've established, a communication path. We meet with them. We have an email distribution list. We have some shared online folders, right? There's no magic here, but just establishing expectations that we want to hear what their needs are. Really listening and part of the solution allowed us to have a very flexible solution. We determined that we didn't need to create LMSs and distributions and content. After doing a good needs after a good needs assessment, we determined that we just had to make the content available for most, and they could take it from there. And for the whatever it was, roughly the 20% that didn't have organic LMS functionality when we started, then we could put extra help and resources in those places by helping them figure out distribution systems and helping them find administrators and pool learning with that group of agencies that used the higher ed solution that we were able to get some LMS functionality through one of our higher ed partners. And so I think, again, it wasn't us about really creating systems. It was about the initial drive for collaboration and engagement, and then really listening and having a good sense of what our success was getting this standardized content to all employees. And once we engaged our partners in that conversation, the solutions became apparent.
Well, go ahead, John.
If I can just add to that, and I think one of the critical factors is, one, it was something that our employees were asking for in the employer of choice listening tours. They wanted more training, more access to training. And we realized, well, some of them don't have access to training because there's no LMS supporting them. There's no platform to do it. Well, and what we didn't know was how critical remote learning was going to be in here. Had we not engaged in that work and started the ball rolling, we would have been in a world of hurt in terms of trying to get information across to our employees, or at least creating that ability for agencies to do so, and to think about how they will train their employees in a more remote future.
Well, I'm definitely sensing a very creative, cost-effective team here, just creative solutions that maybe not necessarily weren't big budget lifts, big ask, and definitely something that we're going to have to do more of. So we only have about 10 minutes left. I know it's going super fast. If the audience has any questions, feel free to ask those questions in the chat, and we will ask those of our panelists. I'll see if Scott, do we have any there? I don't see any.
We don't currently, but I've got a question.
Yeah.
Can I be? So Clara, I'd love to come back to you. You were talking about making the state an attractive place to work and making it accessible to different. I was in Denver a few months ago, and of course we go from the sort of beanie wearing hipsters of downtown Denver. You drive an hour north and it's agriculture and rural America. I mean, that's an incredible jump in terms of perspectives. How are you addressing sort of talent attraction in a state that has a booming economy to play to sort of multiple political audiences? I sort of use political with a sort of political outlook rather than a voting lens. But how are you speaking to that from a talent side?
Well, maybe one of the blessings of not having the money to do a formal branding campaign has been that it really is all about grassroots effort. And, you know, we've had some interesting recent challenges, as I'm sure every state has, with our Department of Corrections and keeping them staffed, given the level of, I believe that's the national experience right now. We were actually able to do something pretty creative, I think, in tandem with unemployment, to directly market open critical fill positions to targeted geographical locations. You know, nobody has prisons for the most part in their metro area where their talent exists, right? Like, we all move them out to these random corners of our state, and that creates a tremendous challenge. So that was one. I mean, that's not really engagement or interaction, but it was one way to kind of use geospatial data and understanding of populations to help start to solve a problem. And we are very excited to continue our work with labor and unemployment to see, you know, what other options exist for us. But you're exactly right. We have a huge rural urban divide. And so that means that as we're working with groups in the state, we need to meet them where they're at. We need to understand who they are. We need to understand the drivers of the local economy in the areas that we're staffing. And we need to be sensitive to that. And so that will be part of our task.
It's interesting. So the takeaway was we didn't have the budget for a statewide marketing campaign, but that meant that it had to be localized. It was a localized voice, which almost becomes a recommendation. I love that.
Exactly.
So I haven't seen any other questions, but there are a few other things reading your strategic plan I wanted to dig into that you haven't covered yet. And I'll lean into Cara unless someone else wants to take it. You also mentioned recognition. And in there, it was noted that one of the top reasons that people stay is for recognition. And that's something that you wanted to keep in the future. What does that recognition or awards, what does that look like in the state?
Sure, and everyone jump in. I think for us, one of the blessings of working in this administration is that recognition comes top down. Governor Polis has been like out of the gate. I think he's convened my janitors who clean the Capitol like 7 times to thank them. But he's the one who comes up, he drives this. The other day in cabinet, we said something like, oh, I have a person who's retiring after 40 years. And the governor said, give me this person's phone number so I can thank them. And that kind of culture and thinking from the top has really put a spotlight on, particularly in this time, but also just generally thinking employees. So it's everything from the big things to the little thing. Everyone is in, well, not everyone. I heard one state is doing really well and doesn't have a budget crunch, but most of us have budget crunches. And so compensation, states tend to fall behind on compensation. So we have to be very thoughtful in how we reward and recognize employees. How do we use even those little dollars that we do have for more incentive and spot awards? The other thing we heard loud and clear in our listening sessions is we have a 3-tier performance system where you can be like 1, 2, or 3. And we heard over and over again, we need bigger differential. So our high performers want to be able to be distinguished from our average performers. And that is something we will certainly be looking and working on this year. And of course, now we have a union. So everything in our employer choice not everything, but almost everything is now has that extra layer of bringing the union along. A lot of these things they are absolutely in alignment with. And then also, I think for us, we've talked a lot about best practices from other agencies and learning. And so as we convene HR directors or deputy directors, what are those things that they're doing that are successful in rewarding and recognizing employees? Whether you have a meeting once a year where you recognize all your milestone employees, like reaching their 25th and 30th anniversaries, and those kinds of things. So it's everything from money to, like, some people are note writers, right? Or some, and I think in this COVID environment, you've seen the level of communication and the level of appreciation skyrocket. We all know everyone's working really hard. And so being mindful of taking that moment to thank everyone for that work.
One thing I'd just like to add to that is I feel like there's a connection between the concept of rewards and recognition and something else we heard from the listening tours, which is career development. It ties into training, which ties into what Clara has talked about in terms of attracting talent, which is this understanding that at the state, you have an opportunity to really grow your career. You can have many different careers within your state employment. You can move from agency to agency and grow and develop. And recognition doesn't necessarily have to look like more money. It can look like more complex projects and responsibility that help you develop your career and you learn new skills and competencies so that you can grow and move on. And I feel like there's a way that all of these things play in the same space and overlap. And I think the extent to which we can tap into that and help people, to Clara's point, see the state differently, and to see the state really as a talent developer, as a place where you can grow and learn, and maintain a really vibrant and fulfilling career, and be recognized for your work in supporting your community all at the same time. I think that's sort of the sweet spot that we can find.
Yeah, and I saw
John?
that. Yeah, Tim.
Yeah, and I was just going to kind of bring it full circle, because I think the way we do that is just kind of listening to our conversation so far in the last 10 minutes or so, is engage our audiences. We didn't have to create the need for recognition. We didn't have to create the demand for people to share these resources. We just kind of had to listen and create and give them the venue, sort of get out of the way and provide some channels for them to share this information. And I think about, Cara, the increase in the values programs that we've seen in our agency and others, and the increase in usage of employee recognition programs. I think being remote has exacerbated the need for more contact and recognition. And I think I would encourage any state or any agency to sort of tap in, find out where that demand is, and then put a simple system in place. The people will figure out. They'll tell you what they want to do. We just have to encourage them.
Yeah, and one, John, I'm writing this down, but more recognition. I love that also can mean more complex problems. I was rewarded by giving a more complex, hairy, sticky problem that I got to be involved in. And then in the recording, Clara said, there's no one tapping on your shoulder saying, hey, you're at HHS, you would make a great candidate over here in labor, or you'd make a great candidate over here in leadership, in corrections, and helping people understand that path. So what did you guys do? Is it a tool set? How are you helping people career path in the state?
We've done actually a couple of things. Tim had a big project that just got launched in this area. And then just really quickly, that's another kind of internal branding campaign that we're wrapping into EDI as well, which we're thinking that what we'll do is work with our communications groups across the state and our PIO groups and find our success stories that might also happen to be diverse, right? And start really showing through video testimonials how the people who have been extremely successful of coming in after high school and then growing into leadership roles, because we have so many of those stories. State government is known for this. This is something we all do really, really well. And so that will go on our career page that we just launched. So now that we've got the platform, we can start building out content.
That you can have this entire career with a bunch of different varied jobs over your tenure. So we only have about 5 minutes left before we're going to hear from Missouri. We do have a question that says, curious about the work around improving and ensuring accessibility for employees that look like at the state level for Colorado for both COVID world and post-COVID planning. So it looks like ensuring accessibility for employees.
So it sounds like we can do a little deeper dive at some point on this accessibility point, the state of Washington wrestling with the same thing. And yeah, accessibility across the board, how you defined it was really interesting, both from the right thing to do, but also accessing talent. I suspect there's some self-interest there too. Yeah, I love that.
All right. So what is our last minute one pitch? We'll kind of just go around the robin since we're closing out here. What else should states know about this initiative? Maybe something you wouldn't do again, your big aha moment. What would you like to tell your peers across the country? And I'll start with Cara.
Darn it, I was hoping they'd go first so I could just say ditto. I think for me, it was a lot of consistency in what employees wanted. Of course, compensation, like, yes, but there was a lot of other things that you can do as an employer to recruit and retain great employees. And having this team, and there's obviously other members of our Employer of Choice Initiative team, work on I think COVID has also created this opportunity where we could move things really fast, right? We have this opportunity to change the way government looks. I mean, this isn't flexible work arrangements. This isn't, Claire was talking about how we're doing branding differently, and it's created this opportunity for us to think very differently. So I would highlight both of those.
All right, since next on my screen, I'm gonna go to Tim. Tim, any big aha moment or lesson that you think your peers should know?
Yeah, I think resist the urge to go out and start some new brand new thing or go buy some new technology. I think the best practice is, listen to your people, leverage what you have, clarify your expectations. I think that's what's really guided us. That's what's given us the most impact so far.
Yeah, I definitely could hear that trend. Super cost-effective, budget-friendly solutions at first. Maybe there's other things, but and love the cat there. So what about Clara?
I think my biggest takeaway is know your experts. In the past, we would have gone to a consultant or a vendor, and now we can't do that. And so knowing who your thought leaders are in any given area, like if I need an assessment and evaluation specialist, one of our agencies is bound to have one. Start reaching out and just ask. If they're too busy, they'll tell you, but leverage our resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking internally, lots of these state agencies help external agencies, and the state could be one of the largest employers. So can they also use their expertise to help internally? All right, John, wrap it up, put us in a bow. Any big lesson learned?
I'll do my best. I think it's a lot of what Clara was saying, but rather in terms of, my work around EDI, it's tapping into the passions of people around the states. There were people who couldn't wait to get involved in this work, who brought a lot of expertise and knowledge to it. And so I think, to Clara's point, is use your resources and tap into the passions of the people who you've already, got right at your fingertips, right? And just create the venues for them to share best practices, to share what they want to do. There was such a hunger and a desire to participate in this work. And, like I said, it starts to become an opportunity for employees to grow and lead in new ways and step into to a new space. And lastly, to give you some historical perspective, because so often, the things are bright new shiny thing. Somebody will say, well, they did try that 10 years ago. And not to say that you shouldn't do it now, but here are some lessons learned from that. So you've got that value, you've got that human capital at your fingertips, and it's just a matter of tapping into those resources and those voices to help move your work forward.
If I could just add there, I think we're all under these budget crunches, and so it's making us be more mindful of when we do engage vendors, right? Being very strategic and thoughtful about when we bring those vendor partners on, because a lot of this work or all of our work, their expertise has been so beneficial, but it's really, we have to be much more mindful of what exactly we're looking for from them.
Well, what such an amazing session. We have the longer recording, and thanks for you guys' live Q&A. If you haven't checked out their strategic plan, it's on their website. I've run through it. Very informative, great resource if you want to replicate or duplicate or use pieces of their learning in your state. So thank you, Team Colorado. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Scott. We're going to stay in this HR employee engagement space with the state of Missouri. So Scott, the floor is yours.